which makes him one of the very few professionally trained futurists on the planet. Then again, he got that degree way back in 1981, so it's pretty much history at this point. As a futurist, David's spoken to over 1,500 audiences around the world with an interesting mix of clients such as Apple and IBM, Harley-Davidson, and Miller Brewing. He's had a couple of real jobs, too, one with Johnson Controls and the other with Northwestern Mutual. In December 2013, he completed a 3-year term as a public director on the board of the American Institute of Architects. As a speaker, David's been on the program with many fascinating people, including former coach Mike Ditka, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, former Secretary of State and presidential nominee Hillary Clinton. Because he has difficulty predicting lottery numbers and he can't predict the stock market, he's here with us today to talk about trends, traditions. I guess they didn't like that joke or something. Take ownership of your future. Please welcome David Zach.
Thanks, Chris. Now, he left out one punchline where it said, I've been on the program with the likes of Mike Ditka and Hillary Rodham Clinton. This means I'm either on my way up or on my way down. So my little remote control has a timer in it, and it says 49 minutes. So I have 49 minutes in which to explain the future. Means we're going to have to leave out some of the details. We don't have a lot of time. There's a lot to cover, so here's a quick introduction of me. All right, let's move on. And ask the question, when thinking about the future, what comes after, what comes next? We're really, really good at going, if this, then that. But it's not thinking farther. It's not thinking through to the subsequent implication upon implication upon implication that gets us into trouble. So imagine, this isn't the 70th anniversary, but this is the 80th anniversary of MERS. 2026. Let me just check. How many of you plan on still being alive in 2026? How many are going to wait and see how the talk goes? How many of you are afraid to raise your hand in front of me? Memorize this number. Internet Protocol version 6. This is the number of potential new internet addresses that comes with the new system because we're running out of addresses. There are so many points on the internet. And I think when Bill Clinton started as president, there was like 30 websites. And now there's unlimited websites, it seems. Here's the way to put that number into perspective. There are enough of them to put 40 of them in every cubic centimeter on the planet. There's work to be done. The Internet of Things, things talking to things, most of which is going to bypass us. How many of you work on a computer? If you didn't raise your hand, how'd you get in the room? Get this. Research shows if you work on a computer, you touch your computer more than anything else in your life. And they don't touch back. Not yet. But they will, and when they do, the game will be pretty much over. Which brings up this quotation from Mitch Ratliff. I have no idea who he is, but he's really smart. Because he says that if a computer lets you make more mistakes faster than any invention in human history with the possible exception of handguns and tequila. And I'm sticking around through tomorrow so we can try this out tonight, maybe. That picture is from 1916. It's 100 years old. 30 years older than this organization. And in that year, they imagined picture phones. But notice what they didn't imagine. Backlighting, because there's a little light on the top, and they didn't imagine wireless. But think about this little thing. Think about how we relate to them. We cradle them. We gaze into them. We talk to them. We listen to them. We stroke them. There's just 2 words missing to explain what's going on here. My precious. And how many of you are looking at them right now? What? Huh? Squirrel. How many heard what ADOS is? ADOS. Attention, deficit, ooh, shiny. And these things are tools of distraction. Remember when they started first selling this? They said, you're going to use these to connect with anybody on the planet. And as a result of these things, for the most part, we no longer talk to strangers. Huh. What's the value of strangers? Think about your life and how many things have happened because you met somebody unexpectedly. Our behavior with these things is indistinguishable from either an addiction or much, much worse, worship. And in Chris's little video, the retrospect, they showed this at one point. This is the Google car, the self-driving Google car. I read a review, and it said if you have one of these, there are going to be 3 things that you will definitely have in your life. Number 1, safety. Number 2, efficiency. And number 3, celibacy. Is that not the visual definition of a clown car? Will Google dominate retirement systems? Let me rephrase that. Will Google dominate retirement systems, storage, transportation, logistics, on and on and on and on and on? Because they want to get into everything. What if we could Google everything? Here's another way of phrasing that. What if Google can Google everything? Milton Friedman, the economist, said the power to do good is also the power to do harm. And how much of big data takes things from us as opposed to give? Big data is about making the world more predictable. And with predictability comes safety. But you think about the people you're sitting with. And if you were to say to one person at the table that this other person is predictable, is that a compliment? It's another way of saying they're boring. And cultures will do almost anything to not be boring. Individuals will go to any length to get rid of boredom, which tells you we may be in for some bigger surprises than you've ever imagined. G.K. Chesterton, English writer, died in 1936. He said, we are learning to do a great many clever things. The next great task be to learn not to do them. Are you what you eat? The Royal School of Design in London wants to take smart dust, those little black squares, those are salt crystals next to it, little RFID type tags, tracking tags, to attach them to baby fish, fish fry, so they can follow the fish through growth, capture, production, packaging, distribution, and ultimately consumption, all the while tracking. You know where this is leading? Right into the toilet. This is the bathroom humor section of the talk, if that's okay, Chris. So there is a company that has created a diagnostic toilet that pays attention to what you're doing, and while you're doing it, it's taking your weight and blood pressure. How many of you are just freaking out at this point? How many of you are bothered by this? Why? I mean, what would this take from you? I mean, besides the obvious, what would this take from you? What's the issue? Privacy, yeah, and privacy is what you need in order to be an individual. But again, with big data, which this is all about, if you have no control over the information about you, you're no longer a person. You're a thing. And yet, we all know people who either have or have had cancer. And what if a device like this could catch it the day it starts or 9 months before it starts as opposed to a day too late? And see, so there are trade-offs. And we've got to understand that we can't simply be passive consumers or producers of big data. We've got to be engaged. It's a big world with big issues. And if you leave them for others to decide, you become things. But someday, some politician will say, if you like your toilet, you can keep your toilet. And that will probably not be true either. Do you have a right to be wrong? What if we have these devices? So, for instance, Aetna, as of yesterday, announced they're going to subsidize the purchase of Apple Watches because of the health data that can be gathered. So suppose you have this great lunch, and let me see if they took them all away. But, well, here, hand me that dessert, please. So I had this. Do I want a fork? No, I'm good. I had one. But, this was tasty. Was it healthy? What if you were taking a bite and you go, no, I won't do that. And you go, oh, that was so marvelous, I'm going to take another. And suddenly the watch goes, put it down. You're not covered. And then they ding you. Here's another one. So I came into this room earlier, and there were chairs, marking territory. You tip it up there, my chair. This is how we mark territory. We're not dogs, so we tip chairs. This is against fire code. So imagine having the accelerometers that we have in our phones that tell exactly where your phone is, and you tip this chair up, and the insurance company that is covering this meeting, insurance is no longer sort of an incident thing or an annual thing. Now it goes moment to moment to moment. And so you tip it up, the rates spike, you tip it back, they drop down to normal, you tip back because the speaker's just droning on, and the spike goes up. However, then that person is questioned by their boss. Why didn't you find that presentation interesting? Aren't you a team player? What a world we're coming to. So you want to do one or two things. You want to retreat enough, stop it, or here's a suggestion, gerencia. Gerencia is a Spanish word meaning sort of a safe place. Here's a definition for it. A place from which one's strength of character is drawn, a place in which we know exactly who we are, the place from which we speak our deepest beliefs. And we each need that. MERS needs that. The state of Michigan needs that. We all need a place to stand, a place to find our deeper, greater strengths. Because maybe it's Renaissance. This mess, this cacophony that doesn't look like, this is not what the future looks like as we're heading towards it. It looks like this. And you think back to the Italian Renaissance, you go, wow, what an amazing period for people to be alive in. All these new ways of discovering, of creating, of living, of thinking. That's what we think looking back. If you were in it, I guarantee you were scared to death because it was the end of the world as you knew it. Does this sound familiar? How many of you saw the movie The Third Man with Orson Welles? In that movie, his character has this little soliloquy. In Italy, for 30 years under the Borgia, they had warfare, terror, murder, and bloodshed, but they produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had brotherly love. They had 500 years of democracy and peace, and what did that produce? The cuckoo clock. We pay a price for progress. My suggestion is, let's define progress before we pursue it. Things are going to clarify, but it may not be the direction you had first expected. So Peter Thiel is one of the people that invented PayPal. And in there, he talks about sort of this quadrant of optimism, pessimism, and that all nations fit on there someplace. He said, pre-1970 USA, we were definite optimists. You give us a challenge. Build the interstate system. Put a man in the moon. We don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to figure it out because we believe we can do it. And here's a critical thing for participants with MERS. Money was a tool. And then, after the 1970s, we are still an optimistic nation. We just have no freaking idea how we're going to do that. And money has now become, for far too many, the goal. So we don't have as many people going into the creative professions. They go into law and finance, where it's more the shuffling of those resources. Most of the world fits into indefinite optimists, or indefinite pessimists. They've been around long enough. They know things are not going to always end up right, but they're not too worried about it. It's just, definite pessimist. One country in the world, he says, is a definite pessimist. Suggestions. What do you think it is? China. Every country in the world is worried that China's going to take over, except China is worried that it won't be able to. This is not going to last. We cannot be an enduring nation of indefinite optimists. We've got to figure out how to be more optimistic in a practical sense and how to turn money back into a tool. This section is about a lot of ideas that you're going to be facing, personally, professionally. Start out with some of the issues and then point towards some of the solutions. So there's an app that you can get for your smartphone. It's called Part Pick. I think it's still in development, but you can take like a part, like the foot of the chair. You pull that out, you can scan it with your phone, and it'll tell you what it is and where you can get more of them. That's fascinating because it is tremendous automation. That phrase, there is an app for that, keeps growing in applicability. Question is there an app for you? Here's a way to frame it. Think about your skill set. Think about the things that you apply on the job. And about 80% of that is probably going to be better done by a machine. You want to survive, you want to thrive, you better start thinking about what is that unique 20%, what is that human 20% that is best brought to the foreground, and have that 80% behind you to support you. Your phone does not belong in front of you. Your phone belongs at your side as an ally, not as a leader, not as a filter. Here's ways of testing. When new technology is offered to you, here's ways of testing this. Number one, what problem is this technology trying to solve? Number two, is that my problem? You know, a lot of technology is sold rather than bought, and it's sold on the demo rather than the actual end product. By solving this problem, what new problems am I creating? That's the fascinating one because that's the one that stimulates the economy. If there are enough people who can be creative and innovative thinkers to go, well, what if we try this? Fourth, am I using the technology or is it using me? And that's a difficult question to admit the answer to. Mark Andreessen, the guy that made basically Netscape, he said, software is eating the world. In many ways, he's talking about you and your jobs and the likes of all those robo-investing companies that are starting up. And I was fascinated that, so I live in Milwaukee, and Northwestern Mutual is based there. They own 25% of Betterment. So they are thinking long term, is this going to be a big issue. And here's a great way of approaching problems, not from the outside, but from the inside. So here's a concept to embrace, take forward with you. You've all been told at some training management seminar, think outside the box. Some of the worst advice you will ever get in your life. Because that box is you. It is your mindset. It is all your training and all your skills and all your experiences. Respect it, but recognize the validity of other boxes. Think about multiple point perspective. Learn to think into other boxes. How many of you have anything to do with MERS? Pretty much covers it, doesn't it? Who's not here? Who's not here that is going to have a bigger impact on the future of this industry than all of you sitting here? And what kind of conversations are you having with them? What kind of conversations can you have with them to think together into other boxes? Here are some questions. What can you do that cannot be automated? Think of those skills. Think of that 20%. And then ask, is anyone going to pay you to do that? Number 3, is it legal for them to pay you to do that? Because some of you probably are very talented, but we just have to be a little cautious there. Number 4, what can you do that you want to do? Number 5, anytime a new technology is brought in, there is this push to reach a quicker, faster, cheaper bottom line. And that's very understandable. Efficiency is a major driving force. But if we don't raise our sights and look to the horizon of what else can we then do, you have to be thinking about bottom line and horizon. There's 2 great multiple points of perspective. Number 6, is your philosophy as strong as your plans? Anybody who's ever been in the military learns right away that the plan is the first casualty. And so a coach or a drill sergeant helps you to understand it is the planning, not the plan, that becomes the goal. Your ability to respond to the unexpected in live action becomes the real talent that you bring into the battlefield that is the future. This is an odd book to bring up at a financial conference, but it's a book I recently read, and it's all about, this author, Roy Peter Clark, takes some of the, 25 of some of the best novels ever, and then explains how to really read into them, to look not just at the surface of the words, but into the bones, the sinews, the muscles, to really read into it. And here's the great thing about literature. It's an easy way of accessing philosophy, theology, deeper thinking. We are built for stories. Stories are tools for living. Stories help us understand other ways, other people, and how they do it. We can't survive without thinking about much deeper things. Wealth comes from connections. Basic statement. Wealth comes from connections. Our ability to connect people, things, and ideas is how we create wealth. But here's a very good point to bring up. The word wealth is in italics, because wealth is not just dollars and cents, it's that which has value. We all know people who are poor and have much richer lives than people we know who are wealthy. Do you have things in your life that have value? And it's fascinating to watch the millennials. Because we did what is criminal in its effect of putting them into massive debt by putting them through an educational system that quite often has a very questionable end product in terms of, okay, I just went into this massive debt, and now you didn't teach me how to find a job and how to pay off that debt? What are you, as a culture, thinking? How many took in any news today? Okay. How many took in any olds? And we don't even, where's he going? Where's he been? News is stuff that's changed since yesterday that you might need to know in order to navigate. Old, therefore, is something that hasn't changed since yesterday that you might need to know in order to navigate. If we were to create stacks of news versus old on the stage here, which pile would be larger? Olds, clearly, no question about it. So these are augmentation suits, and they're basically coming out of construction and military that allows you to reinforce the body, allows you to do more. And the ones in the middle with the white, the little red shield there, those are basically body airbags. Now, my mother, when she was still living, she fell a couple times. What if we had given her a shawl, or even, because she broke her hip, what if we gave her something here that if it noticed rapid movement, it would go, she might not appreciate that. I'm hoping it wouldn't make that sound. But is that the automation of caring? Because they have found with some of these devices that monitor elderly people, monitors elders, we don't want to be called elderly, that if we know that our mom or dad is going to be safe, watched by technology, one of the results is children don't call them as often. Buy this book, Curious by Ian Leslie. It is subtitled, The Desire to Know and Why Your Future Depends Upon It. And he talks about that every child starts out with tremendous curiosity, and it's called diversive curiosity. We ask, thousands and thousands of questions to know what the world is. And what that does is it fills in the brain with sort of a web that allows things to catch. And then through the stimulation of those lines, we connect those lines. And he's got this great example of a child, a 2-year-old, who is pretty much pre-verbal, and his mother had bought kiwi fruit. Now, if you've ever looked at a kiwi fruit, it's weird. It's a fruit with fur. And this little baby almost picks it up and gestures to the mom and says, eh? Eh is a question. What is this thing? And he says that if you as an adult do not answer the questions and answer them competently, the child very quickly stops pointing when around you because the child, in the author's word, the child has figured out you're an idiot. Your future depends upon curiosity. And on the way over, I drove over, I've been listening to this book, which is also Curious by Todd Kashdan. So the other one is more about the bigger world and about how are we going to save the future economy. This is about the impact of curiosity on you as an individual and you in terms of your relationships. That curious couples, when they stay curious about each other, they have vastly better and more enduring relationships. So playing off, Mary Beth, maybe your clients need to be reading, this so they can stay together at least for 10 years, right? So one of the big things about all the cost of healthcare in terms of as we get older, we know that the majority of healthcare costs are for older people. You cannot redistribute what you aren't creating. So there has to be this mutual emphasis upon the creation and then the distribution of wealth. How many of you are boomers? Notice how we all do like, I'm a boomer. We will dominate your world until we are dead. We do it through numbers, and as we've gotten older, we do it through money, and we will do it far past beyond we're all going to be dead. However, I think this is very clear. Assisted suicide is going to be one of the leading causes of death amongst the boomers because they are so poorly prepared. And as the society has shifted away from being a theological society of having stronger religious faith to more of a secular society, we are losing what are called our interdicts, meaning thou shalt not. And so the the prohibition, the inhibition, the discouragement of suicide is dropping away. This will become the law of the land, and it will have perhaps disturbing consequences either way. Steve Jobs said, creativity is just connecting things. A lot of people haven't had very diverse experiences, so they don't have enough dots to connect. So as you look at that maple leaf with the dots, that's basically about, that's a process of thinking. So at that blue circle there, that's where you start out with a potential decision, a choice. And then you realize that there are lots of choices that come off of that. So we could do this, or this, or this, or this. And then you keep branching those out. And that's basically a creative mind. That's a child's mind. It's unlimited. It looks every direction. This, however, is best practices. Look, this is not my first rodeo. We know how to do this. We've got systems. We've got ways of getting the job done. But the problem is that when we focus on best practices, when we already know the answer to the question, other answers, other perspectives, even other people get pushed down, pushed away. But that straight line is fading in its color. It's becoming boring. We don't thrive without challenges. The challenges are coming because some of those pathways are going to get crossed out. So what we have to do is bring some of that color back. We have to look into the corners. Become peripheral visionaries. Pay attention to where innovation comes from, which is almost always from the sidelines, not from the center. You all have heard about the miracle of compound interest. Every child should have this drilled into them to understand the value of early investment. But this says miracle of compound interests, which is how you are not boring, by having multiple points of interest, having hobbies, having other things. We have gotten so isolated in our thinking, in our industries, it just doesn't work as much. So 2 years ago, I worked with the Vinyl Institute. The vinyl is a chemical compound that got vilified because there were so many things that would leach from it. So they have tremendously cleaned up their act. And so it's a really safe material now. And they had me in to do a keynote, and then I moderated a panel of architects and designers, these three people. And these are some of the phrases that came out in the conversation. And the one I want to point out to you is, why don't industries and organizations cross-collaborate anymore? And what they found is in the 50s and 60s, there was tremendous amount of collaboration. So when they were looking at the future of the material, you had scientists, you had engineers, you had end users, you had all sorts of people in the room, and there was lots of collaboration. And out of that came tremendous innovation. And then in the early 70s, there was a major lawsuit, and all the collaboration went away. Again, who's not here? Who do you need to be collaborating with? If not in a full functioning partnership, at least in a sense of having curiosity of how would you look at this? Back in 2012, when I was working with a lot of student architects, and the job prospect for them was not so good, I asked them, if you don't become an architect, what else might you do? And I took all of their answers, and I put it into Wordle.net. Wordle.net creates word clouds. So the more the word shows up in the answer, the bigger the word is in the cloud. As you look at this word cloud, does anything jump out at you there? Any words that become sort of noticeable? Here's the one I noticed. Not design, because that's the obvious one. Right in the center of the G, the word love. Do you know the word amateur? Ama. Ama is Latin for love. And you're all professionals. But if you really want to thrive, if you really want to embrace that 20% that's going to help you thrive in your career, You've got to figure out how to have the heart of an amateur. Those students understood that design is at the center of all these different occupations. If you look at the center of the economy today, the big global economy, the big American economy, what meets in the middle, the two greatest forces, are logistics and design. Design is all about, in essence, how we create things. Logistics is how we organize and distribute them. Every company, every organization that wants to thrive in the future has to figure out how are we both logistics and design. And they can't dominate each other. They have to learn to dance, which is ebb and flow, give and take, strength and beauty. Let's talk about piracy, shall we? So, on the right side of the photo is our idea of what a pirate is. On the left side is what piracy actually is. There is a roadblock on that crossroad with no obvious reason for being there. And so pirates figure out what works right now. That's the essence of piracy. The word pirate comes from the Greek word meaning to put to the test. And the book, The Pirate Organization, which is the one in the middle with the skull and crossbones, by R. Durand and J.P. So what turns delinquents into successful innovators? And do you have delinquents working in your organizations? Working for your cities? And some of you are thinking very deeply right now. So PayPal, Peter Thiel in his book said of the 6 founders of PayPal, 4 of them made what during high school? I'm a futurist, not a telepathist. You have to verbalize the answers. They made bombs. They made bombs. They were delinquents. And now they're billionaires. What do we do with our delinquents? You know, and our fear of difference, our fear of, or our desire for safety. It's amazing how often we take people who aren't that dangerous and we lock them up. We put them away from us when in fact they may be the ones that save us. Idaho Lieutenant Governor Brad Little said a few years ago at a conference I was at, he said, the thing about America is, small ideas are as important as big ideas here. Yes, please. Do you remember a few years ago when it was proclaimed across the land, some things are too big to fail? You knew they were lying, right? That's a lie. But here's the worst part about it. In order to enforce the notion that some things are too big to fail, it meant a whole lot of other small things were too small to succeed. And that should be a lie, particularly in this nation that was built with small ideas being honored and nurtured. We are so afraid of failure, to the point where we now have so much grade inflation because we can't fail. Either we learn to fail as children, small and soon, or we will fail too big and too late. Carl Jung, the psychologist, said, play is the work of children. Well, in terms of when it comes to the future, we're all children. So having a more childlike approach to the difficult problems, even if just for a moment or two, becomes valuable. And how piratey are you? This is a little spectrum I came up with. on safety versus risk. We have across the board here, where's pyrate? Okay, there. Deprivation, convention, invention, reinvention, and pyration. Pyration, look it up in the dictionary, you won't find it, but I'm a futurist, I made it up. And you know what it means. In deprivation, people in poverty-type situations, they don't really think about the future because it's all about right now and taking care of right now and meeting immediate needs. And they think success comes from luck. A majority of Americans now believe that success comes from luck. Good luck with that. Convention. These are people who are successful, have figured out the system, and they just want their success and safety repeated. They suffer from what's called affluenza, which is quite often, it means, well, I deserve all of this. Invention. You've got students who are looking for safety soon because of the debt. There's a book called The Defining Decade about the 20s, and how when we put them into massive debt, they don't put down roots, they don't get married, they don't start children, they don't buy homes, they don't invest in communities, because they can't. And then we've done the adding insult to injury. We've extended adolescence into the 30s, if not into the 40s, where we say you don't have to grow up. How horrible is that to do to a society? Reinvention, entrepreneurs. They're not worried about present safety, they're worried about future safety. They take short-term risks now in order to have long-term security then. And the fascinating thing, entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs don't get the concept of failure. They understand something didn't work, but it was just one more way it didn't work because they know there's going to be a way to figure it out. And then pyration, where it's like, safety? What's that? I'm not familiar with that word. Here, hold my beer and watch this. Now, the problem with that philosophy is that a lot of people die horrifying deaths, and then some go on to be billionaires. What works right now? So where do you think you are on that scale? And then here's the other question. Are you too confident in your answer? We need risk education for people in poverty to think longer term. We need the conventional people, the people who already have success, we need to have them better understand the timeline of others and then the hunger of others in terms of trying to get ahead. How do we lower the expense of entry for younger people? When reinventing, how do we think far out but not too far out so that it's not a complete breach with reality? And then PayPal people in high school building bombs. Brene Brown, some marvelous TED Talks. She said, vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. How do you feel about vulnerability? We don't like it, but maybe we have to think it a little bit further through. All right, here's the conclusion. I have 7 minutes. Wish me luck. All right, so here's a list of, I think, about 5 things that will help you take ownership of the future, you personally, that allow you to embrace the future and really take it to places you want it to go. Are you ready? You might want to get out pen and paper because you want to write these ones down, okay? You ready, Chris? I can go? Okay. Number 1, start smoking. Did someone laugh? Start smoking. What do smokers do that other people don't? Take breaks, that's right. And notice there was a little tension in your voice when you say that, because while they're taking a break, what are you doing? Working. Yeah, there's even more tension in your voice. Hey, come here. Work is overrated. It's good. Work's good. There's no question about it. But it has become our obsession, our identity. We go to a party. What do you do? Who's asking? Leo Tolstoy said all great literature is one of 2 stories. A man goes on a journey or a stranger comes to town. Who's not here? The value of strangers is incredibly important for helping us to understand things that are unfamiliar. Stop for a moment and look around the room. Stop looking at me, just look around the room, look at other people. Somebody out there, there's somebody out there you haven't met. And if you have the right conversation with them, you can change each other's lives forever for the better. That's the real value of these kinds of conferences, when, to talk with people, to learn. All right, so if number one is to start smoking, what's number two? Start drinking? Chris, did you know your organization was filled with so many, I won't say it. Start drinking. No. It's start drinking. The people in back are clapping because they're like, let's go now. It could be even coffee. But again, let's try this out tonight at the reception. The Kentucky Fried Research Foundation, there actually is one. They did a study, and they found the average American worker spends less than 15 minutes having lunch. So, average American workers, where do you have lunch? At your desk. With whom? Yeah, there's always this, nobody. And all of a sudden you go, no, my precious, I've missed you so much, yes. When you break bread, you break barriers. That's the real value of having these kinds of lunches. It's not the speakers. Clearly you figured that one out with this one. The conversations you have, the friendships, the bonds, the connections. The wealth is in connections. Connecting people, things, and ideas, especially people, things, and ideas we did at first glance not think were connectable. I know that was bad structure of the language, but go with me. All right, number 3. Change and tradition. That's not a typo up there. The "and" is the most important word. If I ask you, how many of you are open to change? A lot of hands, because we're all supposed to be open to change. But if I ask you, how many of you are open to tradition? People are like, well, tradition is bad. I've actually had people, a friend of mine, Harvard graduate, said, oh, I don't like tradition. Really? That's most of our world. The spoken English language is a tradition. But it is also a language that continually changes and grows and modifies. Old does not mean outdated. And the older I get, the more I agree with this. Change does not equal progress. It's the ability to choose between change and tradition. That's progress. How you change, what tools and perspectives and history you use to make those choices, that matters. The concierge mindset. This is the customer service model of the future. Because a concierge, they have one upstairs, they're there, ready to talk with you, to hear your questions. Except they know about all the resources behind them. They hear your questions, and then they interpret it, and then route you through to the right kind of experience. How many of you have ever used a concierge? Okay. How many of you saw them the next day, and you would go over there and just pat the counter and go, hey, that was great, thank you. I mean, it's just, they have some of the best feedback mechanisms in terms of hearing responses from people. So maybe don't waste your money on a futurist. Have a panel of concierges to understand how can they help you think into their box. And the last one is to play. Again, play is the work of children. Jim Koodle is a designer, and he says, if it's a good idea and it gets you excited, try it. If it bursts into flames, that's going to be exciting too. People always ask, what is your greatest failure? I always have the same answer. We're working on it right now. It's going to be awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, have an awesome future. Thank you. And there are cards on, like for my book, and another little white card that talks about one of the issues that I thought I had an hour, and so we only had 45 minutes, so I had to take a few things out. And then they moved the time machine off the stage, so couldn't do that, but that's another idea that I talk about. So, Chris?
One more round of applause for David. Thank you, David, for providing a truly insightful look at the future and how we can apply what we are learning today as we move forward.